here we have the bread of affliction. Okay. And I actually need a like a towel, just a white one maybe from the kitchen or whatever. But we have 3 matzahs. And usually they have a special bag that they put them in, but we don't have that special bag, so we're just going to use this white towel. Okay, and so I'm going to take the middle one, which is called the afikomen, and break it in half. And there's a special significance to the afikomen we'll talk about later, some prophetic significance, and wrap it here in the towel. Now I'm going to hide it out of sight, and you can see that the matzah has holes in it, and it's also striped, and it's unleavened, and all those are important things in it. The holes represent the piercing, like it talks about in Psalm 22, that the Messiah was to be pierced, and the stripes, as it talks about in Isaiah, it says that by his stripes we are healed, that the stripes that the Messiah bore for us were for our healing. And the unleavened represents the purity, that there's no yeast in it. There's no yeast is a representation of sin and of impurity. It also is representative of false teaching. So unleavened, the bread was unleavened because the people had to leave Egypt quickly, and they didn't have time to let their bread rise, so they just baked their bread without putting yeast in it, without leavening it at all. And so they were in haste to leave Egypt. So now we have this table of food here. I'll give you a little closer look. Actually, we'll talk about that later. I'm just going to remove this table and put it in the kitchen. And pour the second cup. Try not to pour too much, since we've got a whole night ahead of us to go. And usually this cup, we'll talk about it in a minute. But at this point, there's 4 ritual questions that the child usually asks. But our child's not quite old enough to ask those questions, so I'm going to have Melissa ask those questions.
Okay. Why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights we can eat bread or matzah. Why tonight only matzah?
So tonight we eat only matzah because once the Israelites were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord in his goodness and mercy redeemed us from that land with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, causing the death angel to pass over the house with the blood on their doors. And that's why it's called Passover, is because the Lord passed over those houses. That's why tonight is special. And why do we eat only matzah is to remember that time when they left Egypt, as I said before, that they didn't have time to let their bread rise, that the bread was unleavened that they baked, and so they were in a hurry to leave Egypt. And it illustrates to us as believers in Jesus, or as they say in Hebrew, Yeshua, HaMashiach, as believers in him, to leave the world, to leave the bondage of the world and find freedom in Christ, that we ought to be in a hurry to leave any bondage of the world. That is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and come into freedom in Christ.
On all other nights we can eat any kind of herbs. Why tonight bitter herbs?
So the bitter herbs, as I said before, was to remember how it was very bitter for them to be enslaved while they were in Egypt.
On all other nights we don't dip herbs. We eat into anything. Why do we dip twice?
By dipping, we remember that a life of bondage is bitter, and that a life of bondage brings tears. And even, as we'll see in a moment, we're going to eat some charoset, which is a sweet mixture, and that's to remind us that even the harshest bondage is sweet by the promise of redemption.
On all other nights we eat either sitting or leaning. Why do we lean on a pillow tonight?
Right, so we're not leaning like they do in Eastern cultures, where the table's like low to the ground and they're kind of like reclining out like Jesus did with his disciples at the Last Supper. But we do have pillows. Maybe you could see that when we were washing each other's feet, there was a pillow on the seat. And that's to remind us that God has really set us free, and that tonight is truly special. For we were once slaves, but now we are free, so we can enjoy the rest that God has brought to us, and we can enjoy the promises that God has brought to us. So now the table of food is brought back, the Seder plate. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread we've explained. Can you hand me the camera a little bit here? Okay, I'm going to show you the plate here that we've got. You can see we've got a boiled egg. This is horseradish, parsley, and the salt water, the charoset, and shank bone of a lamb. Okay, so go ahead and put that back. I'm trying to make sure it's pointed in the right way. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul says, "Get rid of the old yeast, that ye may be a new batch without yeast, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore let us keep the festival, not with the old yeast, the yeast of malice and wickedness, but with bread without yeast, the bread of sincerity and truth."